company that's very traditionally not held players' hands and has kind of pushed you into dangerous situations without telling you anything and been like, go for it, get killed, we don't give a fuck. In fact, we love it, you know, we just laugh because they're just a bunch of trolls about that stuff. I'm Alx Preston. I'm the director at Heart Machine. Original founder, game director, wear many different hats.
So tell us a little bit about the kind of the history of Heart Machine, because there's like, I think there's a wonderful documentary by NoClip about it, and
Sure.
Just a little bit so people understand where you're coming from and how did this company started.
Sure. So Heart Machine was founded back in 2013. Had a successful Kickstarter that kind of blew up and didn't necessarily expect it to, and it was off to the races since then. You know, I wasn't initially planning on starting a company like this way back when. I kind of just wanted to make a video game, but plans quickly came together to, you know, really embrace the excitement behind the game, and then as we continue to be successful, further embrace like what the games could be and what the studio could be in the future.
So one of the biggest games that you are known for is a Hyper Light Drifter.
Yes.
I played it, and I had a lot of kind of comparisons and ways that I thinking about it, but one of the things that really stood out to me first, and I think it's true for many people who tried it. First, it was the art style, and second, that it was a completely unknown world.
Yeah.
Basically, you were thrown there, and it's like references start piling up from like Neon Genesis Evangelion to like, you know, Shadow of the Colossus to Zelda, and like there's like hundreds and hundreds of games that are packed into one experience. But my main question is like, when you were doing this, we were thinking about it. Did you ever think about the player? Did you have like a portrait of the consumer, so to speak, that you're gonna build this for? Or was this a case where you were just kind of building the game for yourself and just hoping that the audience would be there?
Sure. I mean, it's a little bit of both. I think it primarily is, you know, for me, when I'm thinking about games as a game director and designer, I mostly want to make games that I want to play, you know, that I feel like would be fun, would be interesting, would be pulling from all the different genres and whatever else that I truly love, and like doing the things that I think work well in games, and also cutting out any of the stuff that doesn't work so well in a game. Sure, we think about the audience all the time. We talk about that with testing, you know, QA or otherwise, internal or otherwise. We definitely have a lot of discussions about that stuff. But first and foremost, I just try and imagine like, what's the game that I would be really excited to play right now, you know, that's not out at the moment.
Let's talk a little bit about this idea of kind of new, unknown world. If you launch any title right now, if you go on PlayStation, or even if it's like a very niche indie thing, there's still going to be some kind of a tutorial that guides you. How do you feel about it? Like, do you feel like this is something that helps the whole experience? Do you think it's necessary, or do you feel like you can try to do without it? And if so, do you really think in games you need a lot of hand-holding right now? Because it is everywhere. Or do you feel like you can kind of let the player go, you know, and figure it out on their own?
Yeah, that's a fair question. You know, for me, I think it really depends on the game. That's like the very lawyer answer, you know, like, well, it depends. But I think it's true. I think there are a lot of games that hold your hand in many ways throughout a game, not just in the tutorial. And I think a lot of people have been fatigued by that, especially with like larger AAA projects that are willing to take less risks, because we're talking about budgets in the tens, hundreds of millions. And so you just kind of get like a homogenous nature at that point. You know, when companies are so risk averse, you're just going to be doing the same things over and over. And that includes tutorialization that's pretty rote. But I do think tutorials have a necessary spot. I think there are better and worse ways to do them. And I also think those better and worse ways aren't applicable to every game universally. I think it's going to depend on the game. I think one of the greatest examples of in-game tutorialization, I think, is still the original Super Mario Brothers. You've got blocks above you, you've got this mushroom guy walking towards you. If you touch it, you die. So you got to learn that, like, oh, I can jump, but they want you to know that you can jump on it to kill it, and that's how you tackle enemies. You wouldn't know that otherwise. This is a game, one of the newest ideas about like side scrolling and how to tackle enemies. So there's no assumption that there's core knowledge there. And so how they do that? Well, they put blocks that immediately bash you down, and you're very, very likely to hit that enemy, even if you were intending to jump over it. And so it's smart tutorialization like that that's my favorite, because it feels natural. It feels like the developers really thought about it, but it's also really difficult to pull off. So it depends. And my least favorite type of tutorial are the ones that feel like it's just text boxes and videos and like stopping you midway through the action. It's funny because Elden Ring recently, they're known to be pretty obtuse as far as like how they describe their world and mechanics to the player, and like they're like slowly letting them in on the secret in a lot of ways. But in Elden Ring, they took it a step further with the tutorialization. They did put in some of that like blatant text and whatever else, because they had so much in that game that I think they had to make some concessions to what they had previously done on kind of their in-world tutorialization. Like, you'll learn as you go type of mentality, where it's like, it's an open world, so it's a different format. And so that's a good example of like a company that's very traditionally not held players' hands and has kind of pushed you into dangerous situations without telling you anything, and been like, go for it, get killed, we don't give a fuck. In fact, we love it. We just laugh because they're just a bunch of trolls about that stuff. And it's great. But then you see the shift in Elden Ring where it's like, well, I think we need this because of the structure that's coming. And we have so much stuff in this game that, like, let's just get it out of the way. Here's your map. We'll teach you how to do your map. We'll teach you how to lock on. We'll teach you how to do these basics, because we don't want you having to sit there thinking about what the heck is going on when you're out in the open world, because you have so much other stuff to think about. So it's that cognitive load where, what do you get out of the way for the player? What do you make explicit? And what can you make more discoverable for the player? So
you talked a little bit about Elden Ring, and the Elden Ring has, like all the Soul series, they have this feature where players leave messages, but otherwise the messages are very much controlled in terms of what language you can use.
Yeah.
Right? And this also creates opportunities for humor and trolling and all that
sure,
stuff. But also
butthole and all.
Yeah,
great.
Classic.
Very classic. My favorite message.
There's also a lot of kind of like cryptic nature, and it's like vague, and it's not really clear, and it all plays for the strengths of the game, right? So, but how do you approach it in your games? Do you feel like using language overall in games might be unnecessary? Maybe, you can play around not using it.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because it's a UI thing, it's a UX thing, it's a gameplay thing, it's all these things kind of in one, and how you communicate to the player what they need to know to make the game fun, but also to make it so that they feel like they're still discovering elements of this game, that there's like a skill ceiling to some point. For us, when we're making our games, like it's always a balancing act. Like, I want to make sure that players don't feel frustrated as like a first priority, because I feel like frustration will lead to just stopping playing the game. It leads to people not feeling engaged anymore. So it's a high wire balancing act in a lot of ways between, with our games, of how much do you make explicit and how much do you make, kind of implicit, and what are you, again, willing to have some fuzziness on for players to feel like they discovered something, and what can you do? So it's a case-by-case basis, really, for us when we're designing our games, and it depends on feedback, depends on, players and their perception of things. I think one of the most challenging things in games, and 3D games especially, is like just getting players to look at places that you want them to look at. Like, look up. They don't look up a lot, That's a core it seems silly, right? But it's a core problem in a lot of games for a long time now in 3D, like FPSs and otherwise. And so oftentimes, games will do camera moves, or they'll do, they'll wrest control away, or they'll do like hinting, or things like that. Or sometimes they'll just do like blatant like neon signs and arrows pointing here and paint it yellow and white and whatever else. And so it's because there's such a variety, such a breadth of players and their experiences, and some are more perceptive and more observant of the environment, and others are just kind of blasting through, and they won't notice that giant arrow pointing down and blinking at you unless you like tell them in text on screen, like, hey, go here. And so I'm a firm believer in, giving players options, especially accessibility options for, color blindness or whatever other issues that may come up for trying to play this game, so that you can kind of tailor it for yourself. I think good examples is something like the most recent Horizon game, or heck, actually the most recent Resident Evil game. A lot of people were complaining about the big yellow X's on like windowsills and crates and whatever else you're supposed to interact with. And somewhere along the line, we lost in translation that big difference between the elements that stood out in a game because of the fidelity of games past, and like GameCube era and otherwise, where it's like, oh, those objects just had different lighting, so they stood out naturally. But now everything's so high fidelity that it all kind of blends in, and so you need to do things to elevate those elements to really pop them out. And I think if you provide options, it's like, cool, I pay attention to those. Let me just turn off the yellow X's because I don't need them and they look bad, versus other players where probably the majority of players need that, And so to me, it's provide options so players can toggle things on and off as much as you can.
So one of the reasons why I wanted to do this interview, why your game kind of stood out to me, and there are like a number of those games. I could probably name Hyper Light Drifter. The other one is Below. I don't know if you know the game.
Oh, yeah.
They start like with a very loud, kind of big event, and they kind of throw you in this world. So yours is probably one of those titles where I was completely there. It's just like you go through this transition at the beginning and you're there. I'm wondering like if you have any maybe thoughts and ideas on how do you make sure that your world works in a way where the person doesn't see those, yellow crosses or things like that when you are basically immersed. I know it's like the word that you throw a lot around, and it doesn't really mean much when you. But
yeah,
there's
visceral,
like a certain exactly. There's like a certain magic where you're in the game and nothing's in your way, and you're exploring and you're getting into it, and there's like the music, the art style, and the gameplay. They all complement each other, and it's like a perfect Super Mario kind of moment.
Sure.
Do you have any thoughts on how do you do it? Maybe it's just experimentation, or maybe it's something.
Yeah, I think it's just like it's a lot of trial and error for getting the formulas right on what you're conveying to the player, what you want to like hold close to the chest, what you want them to discover. And there's no one right answer for even a company that like has a pretty particular vibe. It's like it can change game to game, even if those games are relatively similar. I mean, again, look at just From Software and what they've done from Demon's Souls to Elden Ring. It's like some of those rules have changed for them. Sometimes because they want to mix it up, and other times it's because they need to adhere to a somewhat different structure. And so not all of their like core pillars for how they design things necessarily stay the same. And it's similar for us too, where it's like we just have to understand what the game that we're making is communicating, learn from lessons past, and layer in those lessons as much as we can, while also trying to address new stuff that comes up in whatever we're building.
So let's talk about the new stuff. So that was a single player experience, 2D. Now you're doing basically multiplayer stuff, and it's 3D.
Yeah.
What were the lessons that you took from Hyper Light Drifter that you added to the sequel? Maybe what are the new things that you wanted to learn to make it a success?
I mean, we've been in business now for coming up on 10 years, so as a game studio, and had a lot of lessons on game design, on feedback from fans, from people that are not fans of our games and otherwise. And Drifter was a pretty simple game in the grand scheme of things, since it's 2D and, it's focused on like one player. It's not like online cooperative. It does have a cooperative element, but even the cooperative element is relatively straightforward and limited. It's pixel art, so there's less going on there on the fidelity side of things. It was still a beast of a game to make, but ultimately, the biggest stuff that I pulled from that game moving forward into our next project, Solar Ash, after that was just, here are the ways that I want to change production more than anything else. Like, here's the stuff that was successful that I think that we should continue to consider about our style of like storytelling, the style of our visuals, the style of our music. Those things worked well, and wanted to continue those threads, and we have through Solar Ash and even now into Breaker. And so there's a particular like vibe or aesthetic to Heart Machine games that I think has really started to solidify and cement itself, even in the transition to 3D games like Solar Ash and Breaker that we're doing. And there's always going to be those threads of, visual storytelling that are super important to me and to a lot of people on the team, to us as a studio, for any future games that we make. That visual storytelling is super impactful, and I think vital to our medium. I think there's a big rush to make games like movies as far as the storytelling goes, and certainly there are games that pull that off really, really dang well. Naughty Dog being like king of the hill on that front. But I don't want to do that. I want to make a game that feels like the story is part of your interactivity and it's part of your choices. Like that's the big advantage and big kind of nebulous idea that brings so much possibility to games as an entertainment format, as an art form. Is that interaction, is that player choice. And even if it's a relatively linear game, like you're still doing things differently each time. And I always seek to figure out, with storytelling, like how it works best with the game and not just traditional linear media storytelling. Because we're not making linear media. I mean, you can make a linear game, but even then, like players are making choices and they'll make stories for themselves. And part of what makes games so amazing is that fact that players have that agency, and it further endears them to the characters and the scenarios and the story itself if it's done well and done right.
So with the new game and with your change in the production and going more in like 3D with the previous game and this one that you're currently working on, what were the biggest challenges of kind of like shifting into this new pipeline? How do you work with 3D in general? Do you outsource a lot of that work? Do you do a lot of this in-house? What are like the biggest kind of like tricks or problems that you had to overcome?
I think the biggest thing is still just personnel. It comes down to people ultimately that are making the games that you're collaborating with. And like I can be the face of the company and the founder and whatever else, but ultimately like I'm nothing without all the other people that are doing their incredible work. And I do my best to provide direction on things, but you need to find good people that are experienced. And that's what I did for our transition from 2D to 3D with, Drifter to Solar Ash, was, hey, folks that knew Unreal well, had, shipped titles before, had ample experience in areas that I didn't know much about, like on tech art with rigging, etc. And it's just about surrounding yourself with, not just talented people, but smart people that'll have a good way of pushing the project into the places it needs to be.
Do you feel like Heart Machine already has like a company brand that helps you attract the right talent? Because I know Naughty Dog definitely does, and they don't even have to pay much, and people would love to work there. Like, do you feel like there's a big benefit of kind of like building this brand and having a certain style, look of the game that people are excited working on?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a major value, on many fronts for like establishing a brand that's recognizable And that's one of the things that I focus on a lot, not just for our external facing, like what our games look like and feel like, and what types of games we're going to make, and what people as an audience can expect from us, but also internally, like you're talking about, attracting talent, fostering an environment that feels, more collaborative, more supportive, that you have more say in different aspects. Like, doesn't always work out perfectly because making games is a challenge for sure, and we're always learning and trying to improve and do better. But as we've grown over the years, from originally as just me way back in the day to like a couple of people to a handful of people to then 20 to then 30, and now we're beyond that and we're reaching this mid-range, it becomes more important to make sure that you find venues and outlets to make sure that people feel heard, that they can interact with and have their say on things, that, internally at least, to help to foster that more collaborative environment. And it's a challenging thing to do. And it's like, it can always be better. It can always be improved. But I think that's about the best we can do, is make sure we analyze, like, what are the challenges and try and come up with better solutions each time for fostering the type of environment that we want to be in. And knowing that it's never finished. The work is never done, and you always want to do better, and you always want to do more for the people at the studio to like continue to not just attract talent, but like retain people, make sure people are happy, make sure that they stick around for a long time, because ultimately it's like, I don't want to go hiring a bunch of new people every project, unless we're like adding new people. Like, I would love to keep working with the same people as long as we can. And so that it's important to figure that stuff out and figure it out as quickly as possible. Not always possible. It's definitely not easy, but it's a challenge that I think is incredibly worthwhile.
Do you guys work in an office and everybody goes to the office, or are you distributed all over the world?
Yeah, we're hybrid, and about half of us are fully remote, scattered throughout the world now, because COVID kind of just did its thing and spread folks and changed the dynamics of work in a lot of way. But we came up indie, so we always had remote people. That's not new for us. I think if you're in indie games, you have somebody somewhere that's working remotely, or you're all working remotely at the start, because it's hard to find like a space that you're working together, and you don't have a big company that's like paying for your office space. We started Glitch City back in the day, about 10 years ago now also. Just about a little over 10 years ago now, which was that type of like, hey, we're a community. We're not a community yet. We're a bunch of disparate indie devs that kind of want to be around each other, just to talk, just to like foster some discussion, just to like foster a sense of community. And that's why we ended up starting Glitch City, which Heart Machine worked out of for a number of years while we're making Drifter back in the day. And it was great just to have other devs around and be like, hey, take a look at this, hey, let's talk. And it felt like, an active environment that you could go to trusted colleagues to. They weren't working on your project directly, but they were totally willing to sit there and test with you, talk with you, whatever else, and just be around. And I think trying to continue to foster that even in like a studio setting with just Heart Machine is a big goal for me, for us, overall, to make sure that we do our best as, we're still in a pandemic, COVID's still around, but we're pretty careful about those things overall, and we still are trying to do more events in person, and we have a studio in LA, and it's all voluntary to go in. We're not requiring anybody to go in, and I think that's probably how it'll be, forever at this point. Like, some people really love going in the studio, great. Some people, they don't really love it, so they'll come in never, or they'll come in a couple of times a week. But we have days that we come in if you want, and we provide, like food and fun stuff like that and other activities to try and encourage people like, yeah, come on in, because it's very valuable in some ways to see each other and to get to know each other in person and to like have those interactions that you might miss out on virtually, or just not look at a computer screen all day long. So, but I think it's always pros and cons, and having this hybridization is really valuable, and which is why this is I think how we operate, now and well into the future, is just continue to be hybrid across the globe, because then we can get talent wherever we need to. And it's just kind of expected now. It's less of a conversation these days. since COVID happened. Before it was like, ooh, you're going to be remote. Like, how's that work? Or are you good at that? Like, there's a lot of kind of concern on that, but people, I think, very quickly picked up on how to make that work. And we have quickly picked up on how to make that work as a studio. So again, that hybridization, I think, is a really powerful element for smaller teams and even mid-sized teams, because of the profound benefits that it has of being able to have talent where they want to be, and they can stick with their families, and moving costs don't need to be a thing. Like, I don't know, who wants to move to this place out of here to go to a job anymore? It's a tough ask unless the person's already into I want to get the heck out of Dodge and go, to LA or whatever else. Like, sure, you're welcome to, but I think that kind of open invitation, or just kind of more open expectation, has been a good shift overall for the industry and for us.
So we talked a lot about development, how it's structured, who do you need, how to attract talent, but there's a big part, on the go-to-market side. How do you market a game? How do you promote it? How do you sell it? Where do you sell it? When you're doing this other part of the business, what's your philosophy there? Do you want to do it yourself, or do you want to work with a publisher?
I mean, so with Drifter, I personally had done a lot of the marketing materials and kind of community building. I was engaging with people every month on our Kickstarter newsletter and everything else, and that's kind of how we ended up retaining that audience, is continuing to drip feed in content. And different time, it was a decade ago, so different structure, different format than what you might need now with a market that's much more saturated. But I still think that grassroots kind of outreach works. It's just, you got to think of it in a different way and a different scale, and also need a lot more support. So certainly, I have particular ideas about what I think, our trailers should be and what I think our marketing strategies should be. But on Breaker, working with EE now, who's our community and marketing manager, and has been really wonderful on this front, working with me to build up community events and manage our Discord server and do more outreach like that on the grassroots side that I just don't have time for anymore. And frankly, she's much better at than me. Has been really helpful to have that support internally to build that out. And having a publisher with now Gearbox SF be pretty supportive on those fronts. They want to help. And so even though I'm still cutting most of the trailer, it's we do have support there to have some shots from them, or, have other people do things that aren't on the team directly that are part of their marketing department. And even their marketing department, them having a seasoned marketing department has been helpful because they have certain perspectives. We trust that they can handle certain things. Sure, we could reach out to whoever also, but ultimately it saves us time. That's what they're there for. And so having that support is really valuable. At the end of the day, I think what's most important about the strategy of things when it comes to marketing, when it comes to shedding light on your product, on your game, on your passion, whatever you want to label it as, because I'm sure it's all those things for many people. Obviously you want to get the most recognition you can, from the broadest audience as possible to make sure it's successful, so you can keep building more stuff ultimately. And for us, it's no different. We just have some potentially different strategies there, and it's mostly about that grassroots building up. Sure, there's interviews, there's press things that need to happen, there's trailer drops and whatever else. But I think ultimately, even in 2023, a decade later, that type of community outreach and consistent engagement is really valuable. You build up an audience, you build up people that are advocates for you. And I think those advocates, spread the word of mouth. And the more of those folks that you can have that are allies and advocates with you and the brand and the stuff that they believe in, the better off you'll be ultimately. And so the more you invest in that type of work, I think the more you get in return, rather than just throw $100,000 at a bunch of billboards and a TV spot. It's certainly blunt force advertising works. It has its place. But when you're scrappy, when you're an indie company coming up, we were in those first few years, and first half of our company really, you got to do what you can. And I think a lot of indie devs are in a similar mentality. It's like, yeah, we'll use all the tools we got, and we'll just build up that we'll just build up that advocacy group, those people that like really care about the things we're making, and we'll have that word of mouth and reach out to other folks and bring them into the fold too. It's a multiplicative effect ultimately, or kind of more of a cascading effect. So again, I think the more you put into grassroots operations like that, the better off you'll be.
Does this kind of investment in community and kind of understanding the market, understanding how people think about your game, help as a publisher, and having this brand that you obviously have, does this help you find, initial investments for starting a new project, or just investments that you need when you want to scale up? Because I feel like a lot of companies, they never grow out of like their indie roots. In a lot of cases, they just don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
What's your angle on that?
I mean, I've learned a lot of lessons. I've been an entrepreneur for more than 20 years now. I was starting companies when I was 18 years old back in college. So I'm an old man now. I'm nearing 40. But I've learned a lot of good lessons, a lot of tough lessons about running businesses, teams, about outreach, about, how you put yourself out there. And not just in games, just like in tech and other elements too, because I've tried all sorts of different venues in past lives before I really landed into games. But the mentality is the same. You have to be willing to fail on fronts and kind of try again and see what works. And then when you find what works, like really drill down into it and expand on that as much as you can without it feeling like weird or gross, because certainly there are ways to like go overboard and make it bad. Like an example is like, we think this game could be an esport, so let's force that and make sure like before the game's even out, we'll just set up a thing that looks like an esport arena and have people come in and play, and like, I will cast it like that. And it's like, it never really works. Like, or I don't know a case that works. Maybe you do, but I haven't seen a case where a company like forces a game to be esports that ends up actually being an esport. I think it's a lot about organic growth, and that feeds right back into that grassroots mentality, that kind of campaign, marketing campaign and otherwise, and just like fostering that community. And that's what I've been doing for a really long time. That's what EE's been doing for a really long time. And we leave some of these other elements up to our publisher, because I think it's important to rely on their expertise as well and say like, oh, you guys know how to do more of that traditional marketing, that bigger budget stuff, and like where the spends should go for put ads here, reach out to these shows for that stuff. But I ultimately, maybe I'm losing the thread in the original question, but to me, I think it's important, even as you're scaling up, even as you're growing, to still make sure you stay connected with the people that cared about your games in the first place, and try to continue to grow that audience and brand. You look at Nintendo and their strategy, which is very different from Sony or Microsoft in a lot of ways. And Sony's a little closer because they have their first party games and they have a lot of brand loyalty. And that's great. But I think Microsoft, has gone kind of the shotgun blast way of like, let's do Game Pass, let's put it on everything, and like, let's just get the most people and most eyeballs. And like, that's a strategy for sure. Nintendo kind of sits in this realm that is their own domain, where they can do what they need to do, and they barely have to explain themselves half the time because they're kind of weird. But it works for them because they, A, make really good games that a lot of people love, and B, I think that a strong perspective on things, and like strong, like, I don't want to say like a moral code, but like a strong identity for their company stands out, and people can get behind that. They can get behind a good vision. They can get behind something that they understand better, that has like good core messaging. And I think Nintendo's been really excellent at that for a very long time, about like their brand, their properties, their IP, how they want to do things. And it's like, yeah, their games don't go on sale that often. They don't undermine their brands by diluting the market with 1 billion Mario games at one time. They try and do special things with each thing that they release. And I think that perspective is the type of perspective that we take also, that I take personally, on the kind of outreach side of things, and like the outward facing part of Heart Machine is, there's a quality there that you can understand, and there's a perspective there that you can understand that is perhaps different than company XYZ.
So you mentioned a lot of things, and this is like my last question to kind of, if you want to give advice to developers who are starting their own company, or they're going to market, or they're just thinking about it, just trying to, a lot of people are working in big studios, they have this idea in their head, and they figure now, this is the time where I should start like my entrepreneurial journey. What are like the 2 things that you would recommend to them before they make this jump, to kind of really assess themselves, like, and to make sure that they're not making a bad decision?
I mean, the simple one is something you already said, which is like, just assess that you actually want to do this. Like, make sure that your commitment is actually a commitment, because it's hard to work in this business, and it's even harder to like start a studio up. And I know that a lot of people have those ambitions. They're like, I'm going to start a studio. I have money. I can go to this publisher. I can do whatever else. And especially in this landscape right now, where it's just kind of strange in the games industry at the moment, with money, with the economy, with all sorts of stuff going on, in the past few years with NFTs and COVID and everything else. It's just like, it's one of the strangest times in business that I've seen. And granted, I haven't been around nearly as long as plenty of other folks in here. So, but it's a unique time. And so I think there are unique possibilities, but also unique dangers, or just, opportunities that were shut down that previously might have been there. So I think that the key thing that I say to folks who are excited about starting a new studio is still the same. Like, make sure you really want to do it. It's not just a gut check, but it's also doing your due diligence, much like you would do in any business endeavor, with a contractor, jumping into bed with a partner or whatever else. On the publishing side, it's like, if you genuinely want to strike out and do your own thing, understand what it takes, and understand as much as you can what you're getting into. Talk to other people, because there's a lot of people in the games industry that are very friendly and are willing to, talk about, especially on the indie side. I've found, like, just talk to people, and they're more than willing to like give some insights, even if it's just for a few minutes, and learn from them. Because that's how I did it. I didn't know how to make a game before Drifter, really. I didn't know how to publish something. I didn't know, like, we self-published that, and we did a lot of things ourselves because I wanted to learn. I wanted to understand like what it took to release a game from start to finish, and not just be like, all right, publisher, you do it. It's like, no, I need to know. I did the homework and the research, and then I also, we also did stuff in practice ourselves, because I think it's important to understand the practical nature of this business and of creating your own game and studio and otherwise, striking out more independently. So yeah, it boils down to, it's like, talk to people, just network, and ask questions, ask good questions. Make sure you do your due diligence on what you're getting into, so that you understand the commitment you're making, because ultimately there are sacrifices to be made for any entrepreneur, regardless of games or otherwise. Like, that's just part of what it is. Like, when you strike out to do something yourself, it's quite an effort to build something up from whatever scrappy version of it is to what you might dream it could be. And I still do my due diligence as we continue to grow and talk to people, at whatever levels of experience, to make sure that I'm understanding better, what do I need to know? What are the lessons that I need to take away from what you've learned? Even just yesterday, I was talking to folks who have been in early access with successful games, and asking all the questions about, like, oh yeah, what'd you learn? What's the biggest mistakes? What are the things that you should avoid? That's the due diligence. It's like just talking to people and asking the right questions to make sure you have some knowledge and guidance on that stuff. Otherwise, you're just going to be poking in the dark, and you're setting yourself up for a much more difficult time. Not necessarily failure, but like, you're increasing those odds of failure if you're not reaching out. If you're in your bubble and you're thinking, I can do this and that, and like, maybe you can. But you could also make it a little easier on yourself and learn from other folks and what they've done before. And I'm again, the games industry, developers, been pretty welcoming about just divulging information like, I wish I'd done that or that. And, I wish this was true about this thing. And those pieces of insight are so valuable ultimately.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for enjoying another episode of the 80 Level Roundtable podcast. Check out upcoming episodes on the 80 Level website at 80.lv. Join our career site at 80.lv/RFP. And share our podcast with friends and on your social networks.